live.
Thank you, Chair. We're now live on YouTube.
Thank you very much, and welcome all this evening to Constitution Ethics Committee, 8th of February 2021. A brief statement before we start. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I'd ask all members of the committee to keep their video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted except when I invite them to speak. If you wish to speak, then please raise the virtual hand, which is blue and is located at the bottom of the participants section. Some people may have a newer version of Zoom, in which case the raised hand function has moved from the participants section to the reaction section and is now yellow. Whichever version you're using, please ensure you use the raised hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there's always a risk that we may run into technical problems. I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I'll begin by asking the Democratic Services Officer to do a roll call of members of the committee, if members can confirm their attendance. And Dan, I confirm I'm in attendance. David Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Allen.
I'm in attendance, thank you.
Councillor Bashir.
In attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
In attendance.
Councillor Murphy.
Yes, present.
Councillor Sanford.
I'm here, yes, thank you.
And Councillor Shahid.
Cheers, Dan. I'm here.
Yeah. And just to let other members of the committee know, we have Fiona McMillan, Rachel Edwards, Pippa Turvey, Paulina Ford in attendance as well as officers.
Thank you, Dan. What I would say is I do appear to have some Wi-Fi problems, as I think people have known before. So if I experience that, I will pass it over to Deputy Chair, Councillor Bashir, to chair the meeting. Are there any declarations of interest?
I can't see any hands raised, Councillor.
No, thank you. So item 3, minutes of the meeting, 12th of October 2020. We're being asked to approve the minutes of this meeting held on the 12th of October as correct record. Can I ask for a proposer and seconder?
Happy to propose.
I just see Councillor Murphy has his hand up, Chair.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to raise on clarification and for accuracy on page 6. I think I understand it, and can I thank the officers that have written to me about amendments previously, and Dan, I got the committee report as well, which confirmed what the monitoring officer was saying to me. But on the minutes, I think, and I think people will agree, on 2 items, on the casting vote of the mayor on standing orders, we agreed the clarification on that. Some people seem to be confused that if people weren't voting, did they count or not? It's got nothing to do with amendments. That's the first point. On the second point, which is a bit more specific, is following our meeting, it was only a few days later that our reports went to the full council, and one of our reports was put there for information. But I think there may have been some misunderstanding out there. And so I would like to propose that we agree these are an accurate minute with that point on the amendment, but the specific point on the proposal that was before us to change the standing orders for petitions. We rejected them, and though a council report may have contained a line about petitions not being accepted if they were on an issue that had previously been decided, that is not what we've agreed, and that is not what we did agree. Is that fairly clear to folk that were at the meeting?
Fiona, could I ask you to comment on that?
Okay, so I'm just looking. So is this page 6, Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, and it's
Up
bullet point 7 is the one on the petitions. 4.7.
Yes. So on the vote, the recommendation in terms of the petition scheme was defeated. So that's right. So is there? Do you want something clarified or changed?
No, that's fine. It's just that there was some confusion because when it came to the council reports, people may have interpreted them differently. I've been through the council agenda and we can take that outside, but I just think it's good to make that clear. Our petition process has not changed.
That's right.
Thank you.
There was a potential recommendation and didn't go through. So that's right.
Thank you.
So the minutes are accurate. So there's no change
Agreed.
to that bit. Okay. So was there another point, Councillor Murphy?
And the bullet point above that, when you gave clarification, I think it was in order to clarify. Some people didn't know whether people were abstaining or not voting, whether that accounted for majority or not. The standing orders were again altered, but they were altered specifically on the issue to clarify that the mayor has a casting vote. We didn't change the standing orders as far as anything to do with amendments were concerned.
That's right. Yes.
Thank
it
you.
was just on the casting vote. That's right. So the minute is accurate on that regard as well. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing there is that minutes are correct and what went to full council is correct.
I think that's right. Yes.
Thank you, Fiona.
Just have Councillor Sanford as well, Chair.
Councillor Sanford?
Yeah, I think dealing with those 2 points in turn that Councillor Murphy raised, I think that the confusion on the item on the petitions was that proposal was defeated at the committee and it wasn't actually put as a recommendation to full council. But I think the point of confusion was that the committee report was actually attached. So if you only read the committee report, you might think that the committee had agreed to change the petition scheme. So I think that's entirely clear. I don't agree with Councillor Murphy on his distinction between what the Constitution says about the mayor having a casting vote on a motion and him having a casting vote on an amendment. My understanding is that if there's an equality of votes on a motion, the mayor has a casting vote. If there's an equality of votes on an amendment, he has a casting vote. And I think that's what it says in the Constitution.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Sanford. What we're focusing on at the moment is obviously the minutes of the meeting. Are the minutes of the meeting accurate? And I assume from that they are. So what I would suggest is we just take that point offline by perhaps email to Fiona if there's concern.
I have already had an email exchange with Councillor Murphy about it. I think we've cleared up any issues on that point already.
Okay.
Yeah, could you clarify it for me though, because I'm not now clear. Because if I don't agree with Councillor Murphy's interpretation of the Constitution,
we've got quite a bit to get through tonight. Are the minutes of the meeting accurate as they stand? If you're happy with that, I'll move on with that, and I'll ask that perhaps Fiona and you have a discussion outside of this meeting. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does anyone agree that the minutes of the meeting are accurate? Does everyone agree that the minutes of the meeting are accurate? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. I'll move on to item number 4, LGA Model Code of Conduct. Can I ask Fiona Macmillan to introduce this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, members. So after a lot of delay, we've finally got the draft model code of conduct in front of you. As you know, we've been waiting for this for some time, since the Committee on Standard and Public Life published its report back in January 2019. And as part of that, the government asked the LGA to produce a new model code of conduct, which they did on the 23rd of December 2020. So let me see, I'm just going to the report details. So it should, before I start, I just wanted to highlight 4.2 of the report. Some of the recommendations in the original Committee on Standards and Public Life report, as I've reported previously to this committee, for example, the power on sanctions, for example, the power to suspend councillors require legislation, which means that such provisions could not be included in the code. So you will see that there's nothing on sanctions in this code, so that would need primary legislation. So I just wanted to make that clear before we start looking at the model code. So as you know, there was an online consultation which all members of the council were asked to contribute to between June and August last year, and officers as well contributed to that. And this is the draft code that is attached as Appendix 1. So the new code is non-statutory and it can be adopted in whole or in part by local authorities. The current code, which is Appendix 2, so that you can compare the two, was adopted following the Localism Act 2011. Everybody had to adopt new codes in, I think, about July 2012, when local authorities were given the choice of what code of conduct to adopt. Prior to that, for those of you that have been councillors for that long, there was a national code of conduct, along with a national oversight body, the Standards for England, and prescribed complaints processes and a range of potential sanctions contained in law. Following the Localism Act, all councils had to adopt their own code of conduct, which needed to contain the Nolan principles on standards in public life, along with the specific statutory provisions on disclosable pecuniary interests, which were set out in the Localism Act. At this time, many local authorities adopted a code that was actually fairly similar to the previous national code, but others, such as Peterborough, opted to adopt the minimum required under the Act, although some amendments have been made since then. So if I just summarise what the provisions of the new code are. So there's some general principles specific to local government member conduct, which are based on the Nolan principles. And then there's a section on how it should be applied. So it makes clear that it applies when a member is acting in their capacity as councillor, and clarifies that this can also include that when a member of the public could reasonably have the impression that a member was acting as a councillor. And it encompasses all forms of communication and interaction, including conduct on social media. It also sets out some standards with expected behaviour with examples. These cover treating people with respect, not bullying, harassing or unlawfully discriminating, a duty to promote equality, impartiality, and then some requirements on confidentiality and access to information, not bringing the council into disrepute, use of a member's position and use of council resources, and also a new section, which wasn't in the previous national code, on compliance with the code, including participating in training, registration of interests and disclosure of guests and hospitality. The code has been written in the first person, as the view was taken that it was a personal commitment to the code that should be taken by members. And I should make clear at this stage, although you probably looked at this for yourself when comparing the two, the majority of these provisions on behaviour are not currently in the Peterborough City Council's Code of Conduct. There is also a section on gifts and hospitality, and they're talking about declaring all gifts and hospitality in excess of £50. And at the moment, we looked at this fairly recently, I think, in this committee, and you've currently got an excess of £100, so that's another one of the differences. There is a section, as you would expect, to comply with the statutory provisions under the Localism Act on disclosable pecuniary interests, and it also introduces the concept of non-registrable, I can't say that word, registrable interests, which our current code we amended to include non-statutory disclosable interests. So it's not, that provision is not new to the council. The purpose of the report in front of you today is for the committee to provide early comment on the new code. It's also going to be circulated to the leaders of each of the council's political groups The Task and Finish Group on Equality and Diversity have already started looking at it and would like to feed back their comments. And senior officers prior to returning either via the Constitution and Ethics Committee or directly to Council. But we are awaiting further guidance from the LGA, which is due to be published in March. So that's why it's only here for an early look at this stage until we can see the guidance when it's published. You'll also note that Appendix 3 and 4 relate to a letter that was sent to all councils from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, following up on the 15 best practice recommendations that it made as part of their report on local government ethical standards and the council's response to that. So you will note that there are 3 areas in which we are not currently meeting what the Committee on Standards in Public Life considered to be best practice. And that is, I'll just turn to that, that's in terms of having a code that includes a prohibition on bullying and harassment, and also a section on councillors having to comply with any formal standards investigation, and also about reviewing the code formally every year. So those are the 3 areas of that we're not currently complying with, and we will have to report back on that later this year, whether we have changed our code to comply with those best practice recommendations. So I think really it's over to you for discussion and questions now at this stage.
Thank you, Fiona. Would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question raise their hand? I've got Councillor Murphy first, I believe.
Yes, initial thoughts, we're being asked to start off the first round on this, is that on those 3 areas we should move to complying, including the down from £100 to £50. So that's my comment on the report before us tonight. On page 7 of the report, page 23 of our report, page 7 of the code, para 7 of the code, page 23 and 24, it does talk about the use of council facilities basically only for council business. And it does talk about not personal gain. That's fine, but when it specifies the use of things, it includes the use of telephones. And I wonder whether that could be checked, that it is appropriate, because a few years ago, I would have a different computer for work, for personal and for council business. Don't do that now. And to some extent, that goes with phones as well. You tend not to carry 3 phones around with you. And if you are using the council phone and you do happen to use it at business purpose, I think it's accepted these days, if you're at work, an odd personal call is fine. And if you use Wi-Fi for those calls as well, it's no charge to the council. So I just would ask that in practical terms, we contact the authors of the code and ask them to revisit the wording in that one so it doesn't cause any problems. You may remember 15, 20 years ago, work phones, etc., were chargeable against income tax and so on. That's all moved on. And I know that these days, councillors tend to use their own IT equipment to participate in these meetings. So it's working both ways.
Chair, is it best if I respond to these as they're raised? Would you like me to do that?
Shall we make a series of comments like that and then cover them all off at the end, Fiona?
I'm happy either way. We can do them all at once or individually.
Yep. I think I've got Councillor Shahid next.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's just a comment, really. As Fiona mentioned, the Task and Finish Group on Equality and Diversity is having a look at the Code of Conduct, and we've got a few suggestions to add to it as well. We've got another meeting on Thursday, which will sort of like nail them down, and once that's done, we'll be taken to the relevant committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shahid. I've got no other speakers. Fiona, do you want to cover off that
I'll come
point
back on Councillor Murphy's point. I think just Councillor Murphy, if we go back and look at paragraph 7, the first section is I do not misuse council resources. The second section, 7.2, is that you would act in accordance with the local authority's requirements. So about whether or not you can use your personal phone or work phone for personal calls would be something that would be set out in the separate procedures each authority would give in terms of what you can and can't do with council's resources. So it would be sort of sit alongside this. So it wouldn't need to go back to the LGA about this section. It'd be up to us to have whatever we have in our members' ICT policy.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Murphy?
It answers the question, yes.
I should just add that our current code only talks about using resources for political purposes. It doesn't have a section about council resources generally. So this would be slightly different to what we currently have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, I think I agree with the point that Councillor Murphy was making on this. I think the word I would use, I think there's a need for some flexibility, really, because I think, you know, I'm actually sat here joining this meeting. I've got like a personal computer open to look at the agenda. I've got a council Chromebook that I'm using to join the meeting. And I think we all find ourselves in these situations where we have to use combinations of different IT equipment for different purposes. And I think, you know, I think I would distinguish it, you know, if somebody is using some council resources, you know, to organize a political campaign or something, or they're organizing it to like on a private company for profit, I would think that's a different situation.
Yeah, I think the chair has just
Left, yeah.
left the meeting.
Okay.
So if I can just respond to that at the moment.
Yeah.
I think probably what would be a good idea would be for this committee to have the policy on the use of resources by members back before it to have a look at it. And then if we need to make any tweaks to allow for that sort of thing, we could do that. Would that sound like a plan?
Yes, thank you. I think that's one point. The other point I was going to make was I actually quite like our current code of conduct because I think it is quite a light touch thing and it sets out broad general principles. And I think one of the things this is more of a personal thing, but having experienced the previous regime where you had a national code with a standards board that was very onerous and very prescriptive, I think having something that sets out broad general principles is something that I personally would prefer. I think that I can see the point, you know, about putting the extra paragraphs in about harassment and that sort of thing. That's fine, but I think I would caution against going back to the pre-2010 situation when you had a really detailed and really prescriptive code.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I was kicked out then and came in partway through it, so I didn't catch all of that. But is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Is that a legacy hand, Councillor Sanford?
It is. Yeah, I'll take it down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, what is being asked here is, do we have any comments to feed back? Fiona, I take it from what you said that we could make a comment back on the phones.
Well, I was
situation that it's within our processes,
yes,
our policies. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you missed this bit, but I did suggest that we bring up the policy, and I'm sure there is one on member use of resources, maybe back to the committee at a later stage and look at that to see that it covers issues such as Councillor Sanford and Councillor Murphy were describing.
That's fine. Thank you. I mean, I think for me, the important bit, and you did cover this at the start, is obviously the sanctions, and that's something for government to pass legislation on. But what we're being asked is to consider the new model code of conduct and provide early comment. It feels like at this stage we are in support of the code of conduct. Is anyone against? Okay, thank you. I shall take that as agreed. So moving on to item 5, review of urgency wording. I'm not sure, is this Dan or Fiona who is going to introduce this item?
I don't mind, I'll do the introduction. So you get a bit of a break from Fiona.
Thank you, Dan.
Members will be aware that at the last meeting we had a review of all the urgent decisions that the council had taken over the past 12 months, and following a recommendation from that, members of the committee asked to look at the urgency wording in the executive procedurals, which is laid out in the report. And there's been a few minor changes to it, specifically in relation to the scrutiny committee procedurals, where that's been brought into line to say that when there's an urgent decision, it needs to go to the chairman of the relevant scrutiny committee. And originally, before these changes, it had it down that if the chairman of that relevant committee wasn't available, it would go to the chair of another scrutiny committee. And that's been changed to bring in line with the executive procedure rules, so that if that relevant chair isn't available, it will go to the mayor or the deputy mayor. And that's actually laid out in the statutory instrument, which there's a link to in the report. So it's just basically for members to raise any comments that they wish to have and to review that wording. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sanford.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually quite reassured by this report in one sense, because I think the key point is that needs to be applied is what's in paragraph 10.24 of the executive procedure rules, where it basically says that for a decision to be exempted from calling, this should only happen if in circumstances where any hold-up would seriously prejudice the council's interest or the public interest. Now, I think that is quite a high test, and I think that I would urge really that be quite stringently applied, because I think I haven't got the details of all the decisions that have been exempted from scrutiny, but certainly when we've seen them come before us at full council, there's actually been a few where I felt that, you know, that maybe that criteria hasn't been stringently enough applied, because, you know, actually exempting a decision from the scrutiny process is quite a serious thing, and it should only be happening where things are genuinely urgent.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Do I have any other speakers on this matter? Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Sanford, I am actually quite happy that this is now being inserted in, because there's been a few times when I've looked at decisions and I think, well, you know, are we doing these because, you know, we're trying to rush them through without scrutiny, or is it maybe, you know, I don't know, the officers, you know, have got it wrong and they've sat on it and now it's a thing. But this, you know, I'm reassured that this is going to go in. So I'm kind of hoping that going forward, this will work to the benefit of the whole council.
Thank you, Councillor Jamil. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, it's on the same lines. It already says that it should only be used where there's serious prejudice to the council's or the public's interest. And the report that came to us showed on some occasions there wasn't serious prejudice. It may be interpreted that deadlines were close or missed and we had to exempt. Now, whether missing that deadline would produce serial prejudice or financial risk or whatever, I'm not sure the case has been proven. So it's not so much to change, it's the actual addressing what's in our executive summary currently and adhering to it at the higher bar level going forward. Now, it may have been further confused because there's been a lot of urgent decisions to do with the pandemic. And and we need to reflect that in it as well. But hopefully we can adhere to these a little bit more strictly in accordance with our executive policies.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Are there any other speakers? I don't see any other speakers. I mean, I have some sympathy for what has been said. You know, certainly, if a decision is put before me that has gone through the urgency process, where it's just a fact we've not dealt with the procurement sufficiently early enough to be signed off by a date, I find that a concern. I think there have been occasions when, for example, a property transaction negotiations may be running up against a deadline. We have to make a very late decision on something. So there are times when I've supported this. There's other times I've asked questions. I've always got that question, why? Why is the urgency procedure needed? And of course, we do have the opportunity in full council to challenge that when we ask questions on executive decisions. But moving on, members, if you don't agree to the recommendations, please can you raise your virtual hand or we'll move to a vote. I don't see any hands raised, so I will take it that the recommendations are approved on this item. Okay, thank you. Item 6, task and finish groups and working groups. Can I ask Paulina Ford to introduce the item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is being presented to the committee following a motion from Councillor Hogg, which was agreed at full council on the 21st of October, requesting that amendments to the Constitution be made so that by default, meetings of task and finish groups and working groups should be held in public, unless it can be demonstrated there is clear reason for them to be held in camera. I've put in the report some background and context of how task and finish groups have been run at the council over many years that I've supported them. And in the Constitution, it has never specifically stated whether task and finish groups should be held in public or not. It's always been at the discretion of the task and finish groups themselves. So with that in mind, I've put 3 options forward, and at the appendix, I have included some appropriate wording for discussion and review by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. I thought this was a good and helpful report, so it's appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have any speakers on this item? Councillor Sanford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was put forward by my colleague, Councillor Hogg, as a motion at full council and was actually agreed. So I think we can take it from that full council agrees with the principle that working groups should by default meet in public. I think I would take issue with one of the statements in paragraph 4.2, where it says that there's nothing in the Constitution that says that that currently says that a task and finish group can't meet in public. This point has actually come up quite recently in the climate change working group, where we suggested that the meeting should hold certain of its meetings in public, particularly where we're actually interviewing people and sort of asking them questions. And the actual officer who's in charge of the groups said that the meeting is not permitted to meet in public. So that is obviously a misinterpretation of what the Constitution's saying. What I would actually argue for, and I think what the motion at full council was arguing for, is that there should be a default position that all council meetings meet in public, except where there is confidential information being talked about. So that would basically be an argument for option 3. But I would be perfectly happy, as I think we referred in the motion that went to full council, I'd be perfectly happy that we go for option 2, which is basically the system that is operated by parliamentary committees when they conduct inquiries. What actually happens there is that where the committee is actually holding sort of interviews where people come before the committee and are asked questions, those meetings are held in public. But where the committee then goes away and talks about, you know, what they're going to put in their report, that part is actually held in private. And I think that does then address one of the points that is made in the report, that there can be circumstances, you know, where members of the committee, having gathered all their information, might want to have a frank exchange of opinions. So I think in conclusion, I'd be quite happy with option 2, and I'd be quite happy with option 3. My concern about option 1 is that it basically says that the committee can choose. Well, I think, you know, that is not really, I think we should be establish a general principle that we have openness and we have accountability.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I can see another hand is raised. That's Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, is there a difference in cost between having it in public and having it, because officers are all there? Is it just about having set up the camera or the YouTube channel? So is there any financial reason why I shouldn't be doing this?
Paulina?
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. I didn't realise, no, I'm not on mute. With holding meetings in public, there's not necessarily any additional cost other than there'll be additional meetings to plan the meetings that are held in public, if that makes sense. So it's more about resourcing.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil, did you want to come back on that?
I sort of understand what she's saying. So there is a cost in terms of officer time, but not in terms of having, you know, to lay out everything in order for it to go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I think the good thing is we're increasingly becoming comfortable with broadcasting these meetings, and so it shouldn't be too onerous to do the occasional task and finish group in public was what I took from that. Councillor Jamil, have you got your hand up still? No. Dan, I've got 2 hands, but I can't see who it is. Can you tell me?
Yeah, Councillor Murphy first.
Councillor Murphy, thank you.
You probably could have guessed that, Chair. Now then, at the moment, yes, we can go virtual meetings and we can use technology. As and when the pandemic is under control, we will be having meetings, maybe a hybrid, but we may have meetings in person as well. I think we should go with the intent behind the motion that council agreed, and council said it wanted meetings of the council, including task and finish groups, wherever possible, to be held in public. Obviously, they can't be held in public in person at the moment, but we can get around that. And I do think that's a principle. We talked about the code earlier on, and in that were the Nolan principles of transparency. And one key element of that is councillors making decisions on policy and implementing policies and making those decisions in public. So I think that's what we should do. Obviously, there are things you don't do in public. For example, adoption agency panel will not meet in public because of the confidential manner. And very regularly, there are things in meetings that are not dealt in public because there are good reasons for them not to be. And we know how to do that and we do it. Okay, the practice at Peterborough has been, we've been having a few more working parties. and the practice has been that they've not been meeting in public. Well, no, for transparency, we should move the bar up to holding those meetings in public. I accept that Councillor Sanford is saying that option 2 somewhat gets there, but it doesn't. Let's just recommend that we agree with the decision of council, and all our meetings, including task and finishing groups, should meet in public. However, if there's a good reason for that task and finish group to go in camera, because a person wants to give confidential information or other of the good reasons for that, they can do that, and those meetings can be managed. So I'd like to move the bar up and recommend that we agree with the council and implement council's decision.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Dan, looks like I've got Councillor Steve Allen. I can see that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all have the same concerns, that we definitely want to go for transparency, but we do err to caution when people may want to give evidence and not want to do that in public. The nuancing between the different options is only minor, but I think I would plump for 2, which gives a bit more flexibility to the group to make a decision at that time with that committee and with that subject matter. So I would vote for 2 if there's an option to vote on them.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I just make a couple of points. I've got no further speakers. The first one is Councillor Murphy touched on the decision in council. I think the decision in council was probably more to refer it to us to consider the issue. And also you mentioned, Councillor Murphy, decisions in public. I think it's worth just clarifying, obviously a task and finish group would normally report to scrutiny, and that may well then go on to full council. So again, it would be in public at full council. However, I don't have agreement on this specifically, which option is preferred, but I have had 2 speakers prefer option 2. My preference would be option 2. So what I am proposing to committee members is that we take a vote on option 2 being our preferred option as a committee. Dan, can I ask you just to run through a vote for that, please?
Yes, Chair. So members, we are going to have a vote on option 2 as set out in the report. I'll read your names out, and if you can just say whether you're for, against, or abstain. Councillor Allen.
Yes, I'm for option 2. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Councillor Bashir.
For option 2.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
Yeah, I can go with option 2 as well.
Councillor Murphy.
I'm against option 2.
Councillor Sanford.
I would vote for option 2.
Councillor Shahid.
For option 2, please, Dan.
Thank you. And finally, yourself, Chair.
I'm for. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Therefore, the votes are 6 in favour and 1 against for option 2.
Thank you. So that is carried. I don't think I've got anything else on that particular item. Paulina, you're happy?
No, Chair, that's fine. We'll just put some rewording in for the Constitution to reflect option 2.
Thank you very much. Okay, so item 7, motions and full council meeting procedure. Can I ask Pippa Turvey to introduce the item, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't take up too much time because I know I want to keep this with councillors to discuss your options. But just to run through the report briefly. So committee has discussed the issue of motions previously. I think specifically in October 2018, there was a report on how to deal with motions at council, which didn't have any recommendations coming from it. And members have expressed desire to review the subject recently. We did also have a motion that was agreed by council, one submitted by Councillor Shaz Nawaz, to look at our process around motions in particular, and also the possibility of having additional council meetings if required. So that motion is set out in full in the report. So what I have done is set out a few options which we as officers think you might want to consider. You may like all of them, you may like none of them, or some of them, and we're certainly open to ideas from officers, from members as well. So just to run through those briefly, there would be the option to restrict questions on notice, as has been proposed recently at full council meetings, although it's been met with mixed response. So that's an option that you may want to consider adding permanently to the standing orders. Additionally, questions without notice. So these are questions on executive decisions since the previous meeting or combined authority decisions. These are currently not time limited at all. So it may be that you want to add a time limit to that section in order to move the meeting on more swiftly. Further, you might want to consider a time limit on motions in order to ensure that all motions are discussed rather than perhaps just the first few. So that could be for individual motions or as a whole. We've suggested some timeframes, but again, that's up to you to consider whether you think those are appropriate. Or in a similar vein, perhaps suggesting a limit on the number of motions debated at council. We've suggested 5 as a sort of initial starting point, which is perhaps what could be reasonable in the time frame that we have for council to debate sufficiently. Further suggestion would be to reorder the agenda for council. So obviously the mayor at the moment does have the ability to order the agenda as they see appropriate on an individual basis. However, you could amend standing orders to change the order and have motions considered further up and perhaps move other items such as questions on notice and questions without notice further down the agenda. So that gives a higher chance of motions being debated in full. And then finally, I've just put some suggestions there about additional council meetings. A suggestion would be to have a further council meeting between the annual meeting in May and the July 1st ordinary meeting. This is something we did back in 2019, I believe. And that could be solely to consider motions, as they are not usually able to be considered at annual council. So that would even that disparity out. So that's an option. And also possibly for members to consider whether where we have councils that debate the budget, whether it's appropriate for motions to be considered there, as obviously there's a quite full debate on the motion. So whether we want to have a separate meeting to consider motions at that point as well. So they're what we've suggested, as I say, also up to members. If you've got any ideas of yourself, happy to consider as well.
Thank you, Pippa. Of the committee will want to speak. I just want to say a few words first. I think after the last full council meeting, we would all agree that there was a tremendous amount of time, I could use the word wasted, that wasn't profitable in that meeting. And from the discussion I've had with members so far, is there are some very strong views about why that. And so after the last full council meeting, I had an exchange and I've had a discussion with the chief executive, Gillian Beasley, about all sorts of things that we could do here. And I think, thank you, Pippa, you know, there's some, as I've said, there's some good ideas here. But I know Gillian is going to meet, it's actually this Wednesday with Democratic Services to go through potentially some options. And I wonder, and I wanted to share this with committee members before we start debate, whether we need to look at the whole issue of a full council meeting and the number of council meetings, once we have that feedback from Gillian and Democratic Services, perhaps through the group leaders meeting, rather than picking and choosing items today that could go forward. We obviously have one group leader on this meeting with Councillor Sanford, but I open up the meeting to debate. Councillor Sanford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a really helpful comment. I think we have tried to address this at the group leaders meetings, and one or two of the ideas that have been put forward have then gone on to be talked about at full council, and particularly about not having any oral questions or only having oral supplementary questions. And I think the thing that's really of concern is that I certainly think, and certainly my colleagues in the Liberal Democrat group, and I think other councillors also think that one of the main purposes of full council is so that councillors can ask questions of the council leader and the cabinet members. But it's also a platform, whereby if a councillor has an issue that they think is really important, whether it's a local ward issue or whether it's an issue whether it's an issue of wider significance like climate change, for instance, so they can put motions forward. And I think the problem that we've been trying to grapple with, and I don't think we've found the solutions to it, is how do we ensure that all of the things that need to be discussed at full council can be talked about? And for various reasons, since we've been having online meetings, the length of the meetings have been reduced from 4 hours down to 3, and I think that's not helped. We had the situation at the most recent council meeting when we were trying to carry out all the votes orally by having roll call votes, and that took an inordinate length of time. So I think that needs to be looked at. So I would certainly welcome hearing, because I'm certainly aware our chief executive has been with us for a long time. She's experienced a very large number of full council meetings, and I'm sure she's got quite a lot of ideas that she could put forward. But certainly the conclusion that my colleagues in the Liberal Democrat group have come to is that probably the only real solution we can think of is to increase the number of council meetings that we have. And we did put a proposition forward at one point that that we should have like a once a month meeting of full council, possibly not having one during August and not having one during April. So that would mean we'd move to 10 council meetings per year. That would create more time. That would give you the flexibility then, you could say where we had like budget proposals put forward, you could say, well, maybe some other elements could be dropped to accommodate that. I think as a bare minimum, what we could do is to have an extra meeting in June has been talked about. And I think also you could possibly have another meeting in September, because at the moment, we have a meeting in July and then we don't have another one until October. So those are just some initial ideas, but if the chief executive has ideas, or if Democratic Services have ideas, then I think we should hear them.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I think some good points there. Councillor Murphy.
It's Councillor Jamil.
I was just having a guess there, Councillor Jamil.
I know.
I just get a yellow hand, you see, Councillor Jamil.
Now, I agree with a lot of what Councillor Sanford has said. I'm certainly of the opinion that we certainly need more meetings than what we're doing at the moment. However, I'm also a big fan of looking at what we've got at the moment to see how we can restructure, to see if we can make that work better for us. the whole way we do the motions, and just look at the whole structure of how we do the meetings. I think it's been some time before, since we've had that review. And I certainly, would think, I'd like to make some input into maybe we should do motions here and questions here and here, because we nothing disheartens a member of the public or even a councillor to have stuff ready for a motion and only to get to the end, where you've spent time, you've done your research, and then only for it to be voted on without you having to say anything. It's not fair on the public who, look into you, maybe it's a ward issue or whatever. I just think, when you speak maybe we look at the meeting first and then look at the amount of meeting that we have. But I certainly think, 10 meetings is probably the least that we can, do our council business in over a year.
Thank you, Councillor Jamil. I mean, certainly at the start of full council, where we read out 60 names and say present, it is a good one that we could do differently. I've been on Zoom meetings all day, but I'm always happy to have more. So I've got another speaker. Is that Councillor Murphy this time?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Thank you.
I think there may be consensus that perhaps we do need to meet more often in order to deal with the business. Where there's council business, we should have meetings, but not excessive meetings. We should also try and bring about a culture whereby in those meetings we deal with council business and council business that affects residents. The last two council meetings, though we had a really good debate on misogyny and other issues for an hour, it was a really good debate. Lots of other things in the council meeting were councillors talking about themselves or council processes, not issues that necessarily affect the residents. And if we go back to the meeting previously, I timed it. We had, after prayers, we had a discussion on questions being put by councillors after we'd had questions from the public. And there were only 6 questions in, I think, which would probably only have taken about 15 minutes to be answered. But we spent 22 minutes talking about the question being put on how we put questions. And then at the last council meeting, there was a protocol proposed to be voted upon straight away. And we had quite a long discussion about that. And we basically reverted back to where we were 3 months ago on questions. And I see that has come before us again tonight, basically the same proposal, that we have these supplementary questions put. And I did speak to the Secretariat before the last council meeting. Late in the afternoon, was told it's okay. When the protocol's been agreed, you'll get emailed a copy of the answers to the questions in writing, and then you'll be able to give you a supplementary. I'm not sure whether the officers were banging their heads on a wall when they gave me that information, because I imagined councillors then scrambling on their IT to try and see the written answers and how it was going to work. Anyway, well, where we're at, I think the idea of limiting motions could be problematic, because something could happen that's really important and affects residents, and 5 motions and other matters have already been submitted if they're going to be taken in time order. But this is where it comes in. The mayor has a real position to play. I can remember at council meetings, we used to have the interim solicitor used to be timing things. And at the last council meeting, one of the officers pointed out to somebody they were out of time. Another officer pointed out to the mayor it was his decision to consider that, and then pointed out to him again, and he let the time go on. So I think some guidance and support for the mayor to keep people to their 5 minutes if they're proposing motions, and their 3 minutes if they're speaking on a matter. The other thing, and I don't know whether it'll work, and I have certainly questioned things at council meetings, maybe more often than I should. A lot of microphones go on and people are saying they're making points of order, which really aren't points of order. They're a bit of a discussion, and I know people may not get too much company at home and they're on a Zoom meeting, but at the last council meeting we had an awful lot of this, and indeed some members sort of threw the open mic telling their members how to vote on something. I accept the points on electronic voting, but that's something that needs to be sorted out, and the Secretariat, Democratic Services and Chief Exec can talk about that. So I think there are things we can do without rigidly making recommendations tonight. If we can be focused on business that affects residents, and maybe if you want to make a point of order, put your hand up so the mayor can call that. And maybe if we all check, including myself, that we don't unnecessarily speak. Clearly, if you're putting a motion forward, you'll have worked out what's the point of the motion before you've put it, and that's why it's on the agenda. And maybe we could do that a bit more. But I do concur, maybe an extra meeting or planned meetings is a good idea. I also wonder whether the guillotine at 3 hours, if it's at what it is, again, we had a debate for half an hour, whether it was 3 hours or 4 hours when we introduced the protocol. Perhaps if we didn't have a guillotine and people realised that the matter further on the agenda was going to be got to, they might be more effective and efficient in their speaking, and we actually might get to it more quicker. There are people commenting out there that there are things of filibuster going on, and maybe, I don't know whether it's true, there is an intent not to let the council get onto that business. The whole question about members' questions at the last meeting was bizarre, because I thought the protocol was going to be agreed. It had been discussed at group leaders meeting. Then we were told there was some opposition to it. We didn't put it to the vote for ages and ages and ages. By the end, people were making contradicting contributions they'd previously made, saying that actually they agreed with some of the ideas behind it, but then voted against it on a roll call.
Thank you for that, Councillor Murphy. I'd certainly agree. The filibuster point's an interesting one, and I'd agree with that from the number of points of order that get raised, or questioning minutes or things like that. I'd just respond to a couple of things there that are relevant. I've actually suggested to the Chief Executive that, we should have something in the Constitution that says if you raise 2 points of order, and you should put them to the legal officer to decide, if you raise 2 points in a meeting that are not points of order, that are spurious, that you aren't heard, you cannot raise another point of order in the meeting. Or, for example, we should stop the open mic discussion. That's very much something that we should stop. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hearing a lot of good points tonight, and what it proves to me is that we all care. We may sit on different sides of the chamber. We all care about getting this right. And I welcome your thoughts, Chair, that it should be deferred to conversation with the Chief Executive. What we have to do is tighten things up and become more business-like. You have to remove the filibuster. You have to remove the grandstanding. Hey, we're politicians. We want our voices to be heard. But we have to get the business better, because those watching it online will think that, they've got much better things to do. Rather than hearing pertinent things about which care about our city and our residents, it's people's own personal views and philosophies getting pumped across the airwaves. But I would say that what has happened primarily since the Zoom meetings have occurred. We all get very tired staring at cameras and staring at these little bits on our screen. When we're in the chamber, I think it's a bit more human the way it's dealt with. Sure, there's still cut and thrust, but it is more human and it's nuanced. So I welcome a review of it. Certainly what I would say with regard to some of the comments about the preparation one does, for instance, the last meeting, Councillor Jamil came across with a very good motion, which I put an amendment to. That deserved debate. It didn't get a chance to have that. We've both done a lot of work on that. And other motions also had the similar situation where they were sort of parked with just a vote. And the people who were putting them forward or wanted to answer them didn't have the opportunity to get that across. So I think what we need to do is review the order of business. We need to redefine it. We may need to make it more business-like. And perhaps if the Chief Executive's conversations with the Chair can come up with a way of achieving that, because I know in our own group, there are different views on how to do this. Some would be happy with another meeting, another couple of meetings. Others would not want to do that. Some would want a 3-hour meeting. Some are quite happy to return to the 4-hour meeting. It needs more debate. So if we can move it on tonight to that reference to the Chief Executive that you suggested, Chair, I think that would be a good proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I can see timeless meetings being greeted with joy by many members. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's the point I wanted to come back on, actually, because being one of the councillors has been around for quite a number of years, more than I tend to, more than I want to think about sometimes. But I've actually been to quite a large number of meetings, and I can actually recall the period before we actually had the 4-hour restriction. I think we had a couple of examples. We actually had a full council meeting where we talked about the planning application on the prison, and when it went on till about 1:30 in the morning. And I think we had another one that went on a long time. But the vast majority of the meetings, there was almost like a self-discipline that happened, because people didn't really want to be there till 12 o'clock, so people actually got through the agenda in a timely way. And I think there is a case that if you have whether it's a 3-hour restriction or a 4-hour restriction, that opens up the possibility that people can try and string out debate on an earlier item so that a later item doesn't get talked about. And it's also one of my concerns about some of the proposals in this report about restricting the number of motions. Well, that could cause issues, because then it would be a competition who could get their motions in earlier, and so you might end up people putting motions in 3 months in advance or something. And if you restricted the time that we did, if you restricted the overall amount of time, that would cause similar problems. So I do think I actually still think that having more meetings is the problem, is the way forward. But I also think we need to look at the structure of the meeting, whether we have a 4-hour limit or a 3-hour limit and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I've got no other speakers at this stage. Certainly on time, I think one of our problems at the moment is the length of Zoom meetings. They can be quite intense on the eyes, but I would like to propose to committee members that we ask the Chief Executive to review the whole process of meetings with democratic services. Sorry, Councillor Murphy, I'll come to you and then I'll try and sum up.
Yeah, I like the way your recommendation was going. I just wanted to make the point, there's things that we can ask the mayor to do and the officers to do with the mayor. For example, when people raise procedural matters, we really shouldn't be having a debate on them of any length. If somebody moves a vote be taken or moves a procedural item or a general, you just move to the vote, you just do it.
That was one of the things I was going to touch on. So as I'm saying, I think we should ask the Chief Executive to review the whole process for meetings with democratic services, and then take a paper to group leaders to discuss. But I think that we as a committee have, from what I'm hearing tonight, specific things that we believe are important. The first is the role of the mayor. The second is that we need to focus on things that affect residents. The third is that questions to cabinet members are important. And the fourth is that we consider motions are important. We are also open to consideration of additional meetings within the calendar. So I would like to put that to members this evening, so we move away from the paper in front of us. And with those specific items, that I'm sure our Democratic Services team have noted, that it be referred back to the Chief Executive. Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Murphy, thank you. I'll take you as a seconder. Is there anyone against? Thank you. It's a really good debate. That's appreciated. I'll move on to the next item. So the next item is dispensations. No updates on that, and update on national issues. There's no update on that either. So item 10, Code of Conduct report. I'll turn to Fiona Macmillan, please, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. The report sets out the complaints that have been received or handled by myself or the Deputy Monitoring Officer since our last meeting in October. Just to point out that they are, as you know, they're reported in an anonymous way until such time that a breach of the Code of Conduct is found as part of the complaints process. There is an alteration I'd like to make to 4.2, the second bullet point, which at the moment states 2 complaints from a councillor in relation to social media posts by another councillor. I would like to put after that sentence, further complaints in response from the subject member were also received regarding the content and nature of these complaints and the claims which had been made. And then the next sentence, these have been initially assessed by the monitoring officer, an independent person, and have all been referred for a joint investigation. That's just an alteration I need to put in there and have that minuted, please. You will note that there's an investigation report attached to this report according to our procedures, which were agreed, where a conclusion was reached that the code had been breached, but no hearing was necessary due to an agreed alternative resolution, that the investigation report would be published when the case is reported back to the committee. And therefore it's attached as Appendix 1. I should just tell members or remind you that if any discussion is to take place on this report and the appendix, then both councillors would need to leave the meeting for this section. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Members, this is just to note the Code of Conduct complaints. If there are any questions before we move on. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, okay. I would just like to make a point, not referring to any particular councillors or sort of any particular case. I think that going back to what I'd said earlier on about the Code of Conduct and about what used to happen before 2010 when we had the statutory code, one of the reasons that code almost like and that complaint system almost ground to a complete halt was it was completely bogged down with cases where you had one councillor making allegations against, councillor A complaining against councillor B making counter complaints against councillor A. So but I think what I would say on that is that I would not argue that under no circumstances at all should we investigate complaints between councillors, because you could have one that is a really serious issue, but I think we should be applying a really high thresholds because I don't think it does anything for the reputation of the council when we have large numbers of what you could call tit for tat complaints. So that's a point I would like to put forward.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanford. At that point, as the report is for noting, I'm going to move on. Item 11, the work programme for the next year. Can I ask Dan Kelly to introduce the item? I presume it's the work programme for 2021-22?
That's correct, yeah. It's just for members, if there are any items that they wish to discuss or to add to the work programme, they can obviously do so now or let me know at any other time. So just open, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Any comments from members? Okay, if Recommendation is therefore to note future items, and I think we have done that. So at that point, I think the meeting can be brought to a close, and thank you to everyone for your contribution this evening.